Get Talking is a series of podcasts produced by the team at Get Mentally Healthy. This is an organisation set up to educate and open up discussions around mental health issues in the workplace. Our aim is to help companies improve well-being for their employees.
If you've got a problem makes you scream and shout, maybe there's another way to work it out. Take a breath in and let it out. Get talking.
Hello everyone, I'm Christine, a practitioner psychologist.
Hi everyone, and I'm Jason, a business leader with first-hand experience of the adverse effects of mental health.
And I'm really excited about today's podcast because for the first time, there will be three of us, as Jamie Ramsey, endurance adventure athlete, will be joining us to talk about his decision to take a completely different route in life. Fascinating.
So, on to today's topic, life crises. Let's start with a common definition, shall we? Which this time we've taken from Wikipedia. Life crises. It's a transition of identity and self-confidence that can occur in middle-aged individuals, typically 45 to 65-year-olds.
Now, can I stop you? The only thing I like about that is the implicit definition of middle age as being 45 to 65 years. Yep, kids, I'm still middle-aged. I'm not old yet. Seriously, no, Jason, I want to challenge this because, we can have a crisis at any age and we can have more than one. That's why we've used the word plural, isn't it, in our title?
Okay, but isn't a midlife crisis something specific? I mean, everyone uses the term and it's been around for a long time. So what is your concern, Christine?
Okay, good point. But I mean, it's like all commonly held beliefs, they don't necessarily stand up to closer inspection. And we need to challenge our commonly held beliefs sometimes because they can be wrong. And in fact, this is what researchers do all the time. But let's look back at the history of this then, the term midlife crisis. It was first defined by someone called Elliot Jacks in 1965. He was a Canadian psychiatrist. This phenomenon of midlife crisis has been disputed by more recent research. And from around the sort of mid-1980s onwards, it's considered not to be specific to middle-aged people, whatever that means, however we're going to categorize those. But it can occur at any time. And in fact, we even hear now of things like the quarter-life crisis.
I could guess, but I think it might be beneficial if you explained what that means, Christine.
Okay, I mean, I've got to confess that this is not even psychobabble, it's pop psychobabble, because quarter-life crisis, it's a term that appears to have been used a bit sort of casually initially on social media and so on, but it's expressing the difficulties that people experience from sort of adolescence through to adulthood. And it's now been taken up a bit more officially, and there's some, research on this subject. But basically, we're talking about people aged between sort of 18 and 30 years of age.
Okay, but that begs the question, what happens to the 30 to 45-year-olds, the bracket that I sit in?
Exactly. So this is a point that I want to make. This is the point I'm trying to make, that we don't want this podcast to be about a specific age group, because I believe that people can hit a crisis moment at any time during their life. In fact, I'm going to be a bit controversial here, and I'm going to say they ought to, but more about that later. I'll explain more about that later. So, okay, moving away from this, rather stereotypical view of midlife crisis, which seems to be kind of associated with, I don't know, a dread of getting old, or, anyone really of a certain age that might go on a new adventure, might be labelled this way. And I think that's a bit sad. In fact, I'm just thinking about myself because I went off backpacking around Cambodia at the beginning of this year, just before we were hit by COVID, with my 18-year-old son. So I never thought of myself as having a crisis of some type, a midlife crisis. I was just doing what I wanted to do. And also, by the way, there's little evidence of this term, midlife crisis, in cultures where age is respected. For instance, in Japan and India. So maybe this is just Western ageism. Maybe that's something we need to address. I'm saying all this, but, we must acknowledge that middle-aged people again, depending on how we're defining that, they can actually, it is true that they experience more stresses. So conflicting, roles that they might have as being someone's partner, being a parent to somebody, an employee or an employer, having aging parents and being the parents of children and teens can be really, really stressful. And, there's a lot of research to support the fact that having children is the least happiest time in the life of a couple. But, that's perhaps another podcast discussion. But all this is why I think we take this term midlife as a crisis moment, and or why we think of midlife as a crisis moment. So when in fact it's just sort of normal life stuff.
So I think that's quite interesting, actually, especially the comment around how people are feeling about having children, because you would have thought that would be as you say, the more like the happiest times. But I think if you think about it in your own lives, it can be quite stressful. The fact that you've got them and they're there is one thing, but they can cause you stress. So yeah, and I guess I do find it interesting when in fact this is normal life stuff. And I think we say that quite a lot, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I can hear the hesitation in your voice actually to sort of express how difficult it is having children. I think that's one of our dilemmas, isn't it? Because we're programmed to believe that having children is so wonderful.
Yeah.
And it, proves to be often very stressful for us. So it's not that we don't love them, and it's not that we'd have it in any other way, but it can be very, very stressful. So, I mean, we're not really talking here on this podcast about this subject. It's not about a life that feels stressful specifically, because that's something else. But it's about when your life, when there's a discontentment, a sense of unease, a sense of being uncertain about yourself. And that could be at any age. I think if I give an example now from my therapeutic work, I often encounter clients who present with a feeling of low mood or anxiety or both, and yet they don't fulfill the criteria for a clinical depression or an anxiety disorder. And yet they describe feeling unhappy and anxious. And when we explore this, it's often not simply a matter of degree. It's not quantitatively, but qualitatively different.
Quantitative is number and qualitative is feeling, right?
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so where were we? Clients then who are not clinically depressed. So what I'm saying is it's not like, they're a bit depressed. They often express a feeling of discontent, and they describe that as being unhappy. But then, they will also say things like, I really don't understand it because, look at me. I've got everything I want. I've got a partner, I've got a family, I've got a house, I've got a good job. I'm not worried about this, that, and the other. My health's okay. So what's going on? It's confusing. Some people sometimes talk about a loss of identity. And, if it's not dealt with, of course, it can become something problematic. And then it may actually result in a depression or an anxiety disorder.
Yeah, that's quite interesting actually, because I think about my own life, especially when I was younger. I kind of muddled my way through my A levels, applied to university late, only managed to last a year at a university, and then between the ages of 19 to kind of 22, 23, I had 3 or 4 different jobs. And I think I had no real plan, and I wasn't necessarily focused on where I wanted to go. I just, went through and carry on with a career that I thought was the right thing to do.
Yeah. And, I have so many young adults who come to me with that kind of problem. And one just very recently, just in this past week, who talks about feeling a failure because he wanted to change direction. And that is, he would have failed at the original plan. And of course, that's not true, because it's not failure. It's that the original plan was not likely to succeed. I mean, that depends on how we measure success. And maybe we'll come back to that later. So this reflection is looking back at what we've achieved, and we're looking forward to what the future holds, and we're considering whether or not we are happy and fulfilled and reaching our potential.
Yeah, and I just put the business leader hat back on now. So all the people out there that are leaders, they need to make sure that they're paying attention to, how we can help our employees. I'm confident that the vast majority of companies have some sort of appraisal system to aid performance discussions with their staff. I think we need to use it sometimes in different ways. Some companies have them set up correctly, and some don't, and some it's just a tick box exercise. But I think there's a massive opportunity out there for us to kind of use that time to ask our employees and to ask ourselves to kind of drive some sort of self reflection. You know, sit back and understand the sort of things that make you happy. What does fulfilled look like for you, for them, and how can you help them reach that fulfillment?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, you're right, and that's a good message for, especially for leaders out there. So, moving back to what I was saying earlier, people have different issues here, and some people who have very good sort of reflective and problem-solving approaches, they can make the necessary changes when they feel this unease coming on. There are others who'll maybe do nothing despite feeling dissatisfied, and just plod on with life, which is rather a shame. And then there is this kind of other category that feels stuck, the people that I see, that I see in my practice.
So, Kristin, what's the answer then?
Well, for me, the answer is create a life plan. You need to take control of your future. And I want to add here that none of that should feel as though it's kind of fixed in stone. We can always change our minds if our plans don't work out. And a phrase that I often repeat, and it drives a lot of people crazy, especially parents of the teenagers that I see, is you don't have to finish everything you start. So I'm not saying that you ought to give up at the first hurdle, not at all, but I think you get the gist of what I'm saying. Don't be afraid to start something because of a fear of failure. And really don't just sit and wait for stuff to happen. Make it happen. Nobody's going to live this life for you. And if you have a dream, you need to follow it. It's corny, but it's true. And actually, I think now is the moment to introduce our guest, Jamie Ramsey. We're so pleased that we've got Jamie here with us, because also it's totally relevant, because Jamie is someone who did just what we've been talking about. He made the changes. So hi, Jamie.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me here.
Oh, we're so excited about this. Right. Adventure endurance athlete. That sounds super scary to me. I've looked at some of the stats, and more than 32,000 kilometers of human powered adventuring in 28 different countries, and there's all sorts of mind boggling statistics. But I know that you've been interviewed before quite a lot on the media, and you've done other podcasts and so on. But for those of our listeners who haven't heard your story, can you just first of all begin by telling us what is an adventure endurance athlete?
Yeah, in the world of adventuring, there are a lot of different titles, and we all try to come up with a slightly different one from our kind of people we're up against. And endurance adventure athlete, I think, just sums up what I do quite well, because I am basically trying to do the longest adventures possible in the most harsh environments I can find, and try to do them in a way that is efficient and kind of as quickly and cleanly as possible, kind of like an athlete. So every time I'm looking at something, I'm looking for an adventure that's going to challenge me in a new way. It's going to allow me to push my boundaries a little bit, and it's going to basically take me a step further in my journey to becoming a full-fledged adventurer. And the more you adventure, the more you realize that actually there's such a big world of adventure out there that you never get to the end of it. So that's basically what I do.
Wow, that sounds amazing. It's almost a superhuman. But for the focus of today, thinking about this term, life crises and so on, I'm just going to quote something that you've been quoted as saying. when things get tough, I simply sit down and remember the life I used to live. That's all I need to get back up again. So, what was going on in your life that was so awful that you use it now, you recall it as a way, as a motivation to keep you going?
So I may be an adventurer now, and I've been doing that for 6 years. But before that, I had a 12-year career doing something very, very different, and kind of I had a very typical path through life. Like many people, had a kind of very good upbringing with my parents. Come from a happy family, went to good schools, went to university, and then went to London and took a job in the city, and everything looked rosy. But I think the thing that kind of sits with me is the journey to get to the beginning of my city career was very. I kind of was just going through motions of things I thought I should be doing rather than things I actually wanted to do or were passionate to me. I wasn't one of those people who, as a child, thought I want to do this or I have a calling to be that thing. I just when I was at school, I had to do certain classes to get to university. My university course, I just chose that. I did economics and information systems. I chose that because my father worked in the city. So I thought that's what I should do to go to the city. So I did this economics degree. I got to my degree, and I ended up following all my friends to London to take this job, wearing a suit, going to work every day, hoping for a 9 to 5, but obviously it was more of a kind of 7 till 7, 8, 9 at night kind of job. And the whole time I was doing it, there was never any passion behind what I was doing. And I ended up doing financial communications for a very good company, and a company that looked after me very well. And I think it's a great job if it was a job you wanted to do. But for me, right from the very beginning, there was nothing that inspired me about what I was doing. And I worked in the job for a few years, and I actually had a chance to get out in 2007, and I kind of left for a kind of sabbatical for a few months and went traveling. But I came back to the same job, and I stayed in the job all the way through for 12 years. And it was in my 12th year that I got made a partner. And everyone on the outside was sitting there going, wow, you were the first graduate trainee. You've worked your way up. You're now a partner in the company. You're successful. And by that, kind of insinuating that you're happy and you've got everything that you want in life. But in the background, there was a kind of different story coming along. And I think it splits into two kind of areas. One, I was like, the main thing is I was feeling dissatisfied. I wasn't feeling alive. I wasn't feeling like anything I was doing was giving me any satisfaction or fulfillment or anything like that. And so as a result, I was looking for other ways to find that in my life. And I found two ways of doing that, which are very separate from each other. One was through sport and endurance. And that was kind of going through doing a 5K run, then a 10K run, then a half marathon, then a marathon, then a endurance, this and that.
I like the idea that you started with a 5K run.
Yeah,
I know I'm inspired.
Yeah, well, yeah, but actually, the way I look at sport and endurance and adventure is actually a little bit like an addiction, because
Yep.
you do the 5K and then you do a 5K again, you don't get that same sense of achievement. You have to go bigger. And in my journey through life, I've taken that slightly literally and got bigger and bigger and bigger every time.
Yeah. So I was just going to jump in there because I'm getting quite scared now, if I'm honest. Because I know kind of the things you've done, and I'm thinking I started at 5K, and what you just said there, I've done the 10K, I've done a half marathon, I've now signed up for a marathon, I want to do an ultra. So yeah, I'm getting scared.
Oh, you're at the beginning of a beautiful journey.
Yeah.
That's what I can say. From further down the road looking back, you've got a lot of wonderful things ahead.
Excellent.
But I was doing all this positive stuff in part of my escapism, but the other side of my escapism was I've always quite enjoyed the drink and going out and socializing with people. And that part of my life, I towards kind of the end of the kind of 11th, 12th year of being in the city, I was starting to notice how much that was becoming a part of my life. And both endurance. I'd be getting up, I'd be cycling to the gym, going to the gym before work, then probably going to the gym at lunch, and then cycling home in the evening, then going to the pub. And then I was that classic person that the Thursday became the new Friday, Wednesday became the new Thursday, Sunday became the new whatever. And it was just, I was the Sunday night party guy. But I wasn't addicted to alcoholing. I was just using it as a release. And there was one occasion, I think it was kind of November, December time, 2013. I've been out with some friends and we'd done the kind of classic. It was like a Thursday night, 4 a.m. And I was standing in Piccadilly and my home was in Fulham. My office was in the city. And I rationaled in my head that why go home when you can go straight to work and then you can get more sleep there? So I went to work at 4 a.m., went to the shower room, bathroom, and made a little bed on the floor and slept there. And then literally the next morning, pulled myself up onto the mirror and looked in the mirror and was like, you need to make some changes because this isn't normal behavior. And I remember walking out that day, having had a shower and a new shirt, and I sat at my desk and I looked around and I looked at the people who never see their wives, the people who don't get to put their kids to bed at night, the people who are drinking every single lunchtime, the people who are unhealthy. And I was age 34 and I was like, I don't want to be these people. And if I'm here for another 30 years of my life, that's where I'm going to be going. And it was at that point that I started to recognize or acknowledge that I was on a spiral
Yeah.
downwards and something needed to happen to catch it.
Yeah. Can I just say, do you know, when he started telling that story about the night out, I sort of giggled, because it was a funny story. And then as you continued, I thought, oh God, no, that must have been really awful. And I want to ask you, was that a moment of kind of positive sort of moment where it's like a realization that you are going to make this change and so it's liberating? Or was that first moment one of, oh God, like what am I going to do? Was it an anxiety provoking moment?
I think it was the first thing is probably you feel a bit ashamed because you know what you're doing is not normal. You know that you shouldn't be in that situation. But then I think my mind immediately clicked to going, you're not happy in this moment. You're not happy in this way of living. Where do you want to be? And it was almost instantaneous that I looked back and I was like, right, I'm not happy. I'm not satisfied. I'm not fulfilled. When is the last time I remember feeling that? And it had been in June 2013. I'd entered into a jungle marathon in Vietnam, which was 6 days with a backpack on. And a month before I was meant to go, the whole thing got cancelled. And there was me, raised money, bought my flights, done all my training, had all my kit, and I had nowhere to go. And I remember feeling like kind of let down and disappointed. And then I looked at that situation and went, no, I told people I would go and run 240 kilometers in Vietnam. I have the ticket. So I flew to Vietnam and I ran 240 kilometers by myself down the road, finding places to stay in the evenings. And I sat on the end of the seventh day in a little bar drinking a beer, and I just felt proud. I felt happy. I felt like I'd accomplished something. And when I was at that low point, it was that high point that I went back to, and I was like, I need to factor that back into my life. That now needs to be where I'm heading towards, because that's where I feel good and that's where I want to be.
That's pretty impressive, actually, because what you did there was you did what I was saying earlier. You took a real sort of problem solving approach to it, didn't you? You thought that you had this kind of trigger that was finding yourself at work after not going home from a night out, and thinking, I need to change this, and recognizing what it was, and had that memory as an aid for you to create a new path. So for you, it was a sort of, this is a problem, I need to find a solution.
And finding the solutions is actually the easy bit, I think, because once you've realized what it is you want, you then have to look at the reality of actually achieving that. So we're sitting in November, I think, at this time, and you kind of thinking, right, if I quit my job, I'm going to have no money. I have a mortgage, I have a life. There were all these things that to get to where I wanted to be, the world I was in couldn't continue as it was, but the world I was in was what was providing for the way I was living, and everything was entwined, and you feel like kind of trapped. And it took me 4 months, 5 months, I think, before I actually plucked up the courage to quit. And it wasn't even me that did the quitting, because it was at the end of March, and I was procrastinating about speaking to my manager, my kind of the main partner on our team. And part of me was kind of semi-waiting, because it was going to be the 1st of April, and I thought it'd be funny to quit my job on April Fool's Day, especially with what I had in mind. But actually, my boss called me over. He preempted me on this one. He called me over and asked me to go to a room, and he said, Jamie, I think we need to have a chat. Took me aside, and he said, I've noticed that something's not right with you. And I'd worked with this guy for 12 years. And he goes, something's not right. What is it? And I just turned around and I grabbed that opportunity and said, I need to hand in my resignation. I need to quit. And he looked at me kind of inquisitively and asked what I was going to be doing. And you could see, like, where are you going to be going? And I told him that I was going to go to Canada and run to Buenos Aires. And he just he looked at me in kind of astonishment.
It's what everyone does, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the normal kind of how do you quit a job?
Yeah.
But he looked at me, and actually he instantaneously changed to become. He realized that I wasn't going off to do the same thing somewhere else. I wasn't a threat. And he to be fair to him, even though we'd had our run-ins occasionally, but he was there to support me and help me with that transition, which was great. And I'm very grateful to him for that. But there I was in April, and I'd suddenly made this massive decision. And it had taken a long time to come, because the way I kind of make these decisions to get to that point, I kind of tell one person who's a little bit distant from me. I kind of go, I'm going to run from Canada to Argentina. And they kind of go, yeah, all right, that sounds cool. And then you kind of work closer and closer and closer. And you actually end up telling the people who are closest to you last, because they're the people that matter the most. So when you kind of start telling people, like, I'm going to do this thing, and your friends turn around and go, to anyone else, I'd think that was crazy, but I do think you can do it. And it fills you with this kind of confidence to keep pushing forward with it. And the biggest one was my father, because, the whole reason I went into the city was because I thought that's what my father wanted me to do. And it's this expectation. And I kind of wrote my dad an email saying, Dad, I'm going to be quitting my job, and I'm going to go and run from Canada to Argentina. I don't know why I did it by email, being a little bit chicken. Yeah. I don't know if my dad punished me, because it took him 36 hours to get back to me. I was just sweating, and I was too scared to phone him. And he finally came back with an email and said, pretty much all it said was, you've got to do what you've got to do. And that was it. And then I spoke to him later. I was like, but Dad, we were talking about, why did you go into work? And I was like, because that's what you wanted us to do. You want us to go to the city, this expectation that you put on us. And my dad was like, I never told you to work in the city. At no point of your career did I tell you had to do that. And it was that realization that kind of helped bolster what I was doing, was that everything that I had in my mind was self-manifested. I had put that on myself rather than, but blamed other people for me putting it on myself.
So just quickly, for me there, just listening to what you said, the story so far, there's a number of things that resonate with me, and I'm pretty sure then will resonate with a big portion of our listeners. And the journey that you kind of ended up, if I think about my life, how I kind of ended up in a big corporate, it was almost like, this is what you need to do. And therefore I'd kind of put it in my own head, this is what I've got to do. But no one had ever told me that. No one had ever set an expectation. But equally, some of the feelings that you were explaining there, the lack of fulfillment, and Christine picked up on it, and I just want to go back to it, is that moment of reflection and that trigger. And I think that's one of the things that I'm really interested in terms of, you saw the trigger, you spotted the trigger, you then, right, okay, I need to do something different. And I think that's one of the big things that, it's becoming more topical now when we talk about mental health and so on and so forth, is people paying attention to some of those triggers. So I think that's really great. But I also resonate with that, this this expectation that I think that other people think I should be doing this, therefore I try and do it, and actually it's all made up.
But one of the things on that kind of, you're saying, I spotted the trigger. Well, the truth is, it took me years of living in a place where I wasn't happy before I got to that trigger. So it's not like I woke up one day and thought, I'm unhappy, I need to move. You go through years of being unhappy and frustrated. And then the whole nature of being in the city, or in quite a lot of jobs, is that society pulls you in and makes you feel that you have to be in that job, because the house you're having to live in to do that job is more expensive. The travel you're taking is more expensive. The suits you have to buy are more expensive. Because you're working so hard, you need to go on expensive holidays. And suddenly, when you were quite happy as a 20-year-old on £20,000 a year and you could survive, you suddenly find yourself on 5 times that salary, and you don't understand how you could live life without it. And it's like having hard thing is knowing that you can actually dismantle what you've built up and still be happy at the end of it. So
it's like the opposite of what you never have, you never miss. But you've got the opposite effect going on there. The thing about making assumptions about other people is really important, isn't it? And it's a really big factor in psychological therapy. One of the things that we're always looking for is when people are, I'm not going to say mind reading, that's a bit simplistic, but we just assume we know what other people are thinking, and we don't. We really don't. And that is such a classic example. Your own father, who, the person you would feel that you would know the best and he would know you the best, he obviously didn't know what was going on in your mind, and you didn't know what was really going on in his. It's a lot to do with what society dictates, isn't it? It's not just about the family. But I'm curious, it was really interesting that it was your father that was sort of the big deal. Was it because of the assumptions, or was it something else?
No, I think the father thing is just the way that I've been brought up. We've had a family that's always been together, and dad has always been the one who went out and worked and kind of paid for our lives and gave us all the advantages we had. But at the same time, mother is the one who looked after us on a day-to-day basis. And if I look back now, she's the one that introduced me to all the different things in my life that are interests now. So, but it's just because we always looked up to dad. He was just seemed like the person that you had to get the final sign off from. But things like speaking to friends and family, they were really supportive. And one of the moments I remember in the process of making the decision to actually do it was going out for a drink with my best friend, and he showed me the Alan Watts video. What would you do if money was no object?
Yep.
And we just sat in the pub and I watched it, and it was just that video just made me sit there going, "Oh, that makes sense." Because I think when you're wanting to make a massive change, and you want to go from the reward being passion rather than money, you kind of wonder, like, how are you going to pay for your life? And I'm still trying to work that out. But it's when you have someone telling you that actually, if you put all your heart and strength and soul into doing one thing and doing it well, and it's a positive, constructive thing, then there will be a way of recouping some money that will allow you to go on living in a way you want to be. You may not have fancy holidays, but you'll still be happy and fulfilled.
Yeah, and I think, this notion that we actually can live on less than we imagine. The more we earn and the more we need to maintain that. And so when you start stripping it away, it's not necessarily the disaster that you imagine it's going to be.
I can't believe I'm going to say this, but it's like Jay-Z, more money, more problems.
Yeah.
But I also love the fact that I have this great game. So, I did my big adventure, and then I did lots of little adventures in the years after that. And then I think it was in 2006, 17, 18, I lived in a camper van for a year, and then finally made the decision to move to the south of France and just pare back my life to the bare minimums of what I wanted to be happy. And my greatest joy now is telling people who work in London what my annual outgoings are to pay for my house, my car, my insurance, everything. And they crumble when you tell them just how cheap your life can be, and how you can still do all the same things that they're doing, just on a different level, but you're still, it's kind of a fun game. Meme game. So the next, I'd already pretty much checked out of work about 2 or 3 months before I actually handed in my notice. And then from that point, I knew what I wanted to do roughly, but I didn't know what that route was going to be. So I'd made a decision that I was going to quit my job, put passion first. So I identified my passions of running, travel, culture, and pushing myself physically. So I thought, right, I can't quit my job and go and run a really long marathon. I have to do something a lot bigger. It has to probably be at least a year. So I did simple maths. I went 1 year running, probably can do 30 kilometers a day. That's 11,000 kilometers. Opened up the map, looked at the going whole way around the world, and realized quite quickly that, I didn't have the skill sets for that. I didn't have the confidence. I wanted to do it all solo. So all the planning, everything, no team. And, so that was difficult. And then I looked through Africa. That was too difficult. And I looked at America, and Vancouver to Buenos Aires was 17,000 kilometers, 14 different countries, split over 2 continents. You only needed to have 2 languages, English and Spanish. I didn't have Spanish, but I knew I could learn enough as I went. And then the passport would give me exactly the right amount of time in every country that I needed, that I wouldn't need a visa. So the way I look at it, and it probably helped with that, actually being able to do it, is that I was doing the easy option. So my 17,000 kilometer run was easy compared to what I could have done. So therefore that makes it more manageable.
Yeah, I'm sure that our listeners will completely agree that that was the easy option. 17,000 kilometers.
Yeah. Well, it could have been, I could have been running across Iran or the Himalayas, or but
actually, no, joking aside, I was going to say something similar. I had that in my mind. 17,000 kilometers was the easy option. Oh my god! But there is something interesting here, isn't it? And it's something about maybe breaking down the project. You've got to make a plan. You've got to be looking, far enough forward. However, perhaps not. You're talking about 30 kilometers a day. So I suppose if you're focusing on that and not on 17,000, there's something, from a psychological perspective that perhaps makes it a little more achievable. See what I'm saying?
No, it makes perfect sense, because it's a really weird journey you have to navigate, because when you quit, which is scary, and then you're going into the complete unknown, and you don't know if how you're going to be successful, and how you're going to know if you've reached success. And when I was looking at running the Americas, I'd never done anything like that before. I didn't have enough money to get to the end. So that could have been an excuse not to do it. There were lots of different things. And obviously, you're going around telling everyone what you're doing. You're trying to get sponsors or drum up support. So you have to big it up and tell everyone how incredibly scary it's going to be, how hard it's going to be, how long it's going to be. And obviously, that affects you. So then you have to take this thing and then dismantle it in your mind into something smaller. So what I did was consciously made success points along the journey, which would allow me to never feel that I was failing. So therefore, I would always succeed. So by quitting my job, that was success point 1. By getting to the start, showed that I had the ability to put together the kind of what's needed to start an expedition. Success point 3 would be to run the length of the United States. Because if I did that, I'd have run 2,900 kilometers, which to anyone would be a massive physical feat. And I could go home with my head high and not feel like I'd let myself or anyone else down. And then the next one was to get to Panama, which is where my money, I estimated, would run out. And then hopefully by that point, I would have created something positive that I would be able to work out how to finance the rest of it. So I put in place all these different markers which would allow me to feel success even without completing what I set out to do, which kind of helped me mentally. But then there's a kind of weird thing you were saying, like doing 30 kilometers a day makes it sound achievable. And what I quickly realized when I started is, if you try and decide exactly where you're going to be at every single point of a journey going forward into the unknown, you can't do that. You don't know what it's going to be. And if I had started and said, right, I'm going to do 30 kilometers every day, 5 days a week, 2 days off, my trip would have taken me, I think it was going to be something like 600 days. But what I worked out really quickly is if you dictate what you want to do, that is all you're going to achieve, is what you set out to do. And you're either going to find that you're not pushing yourself hard enough to your full ability because you only have to do 30K, or if it's too hard for you, you're going to overstretch yourself and risk getting injured and put the whole thing into jeopardy. So I got rid of all expectations like that. I never had any points I had to be anywhere. I just thought, okay, today I will run as far as I can. I know I can get food and water here, here, and here. So just go. And what I found is at the beginning, I was running 40-ish kilometers a day, taking days off here and there. And that's what I was doing. My last 28 days of the expedition, I ran 28 days solid, averaging 58 kilometers a day in 40-degree heat. And that was because I'd grown. And as I'd grown, with the flexibility of not having any markers, I'd allowed myself to be the strongest version of myself and keep succeeding as I go.
So Jamie, there's quite a powerful message in there for me. So you've made some decisions, you've reflected on you're not being happy, you want to do something different, you've built a plan. But again, I think just thinking kind of in business speak these days, we always ask ourselves, what does success look like? And I think that's really good from your perspective. You've built that into your, kind of your life plan. You're not setting yourself to say, well, I've got to be here on this day, I've got to be here on that day, but you are allowing yourself to say, well, if I can get there, that's the demonstration of success. And I think that for me is quite powerful. Like you say, quitting your job was your first kind of, that's a measure of success. I've done it. That's it. I can do it. As you say, getting to the start line, that's another measure of success. So instead of turning around and saying, well, I've got to be here, I've got to be there, I've got to do this, it's like, well, if I achieve that then I can hold that up and say, yes, I've been successful. And I think that is a real powerful message for everyone, really.
But what's actually not going to contradict, but what is interesting going forward is realizing that success isn't a destination and it shouldn't be viewed as a destination. And we got this whole thing in our the way everyone lives their lives and performs their tasks is we want to be successful. And attribute that to achieving something. Where actually, when I got to the end of running the Americas, I didn't feel that I was successful. I felt that I was at the beginning of a journey of living in a successful way, where you take that and you always try and build on it. Because if you ever rest on your laurels, it all disappears, and you can't allow that to happen. So you always have to have something next to go on forward. So it's not about it's weird. I never celebrate anything. So when I get to the end of something, I'm always moving on to the next thing and try and make it more of a way of life rather than taking big steps going forward.
I suppose by doing that, you're avoiding this feeling that many people have, which is that the journey is more exciting than the arrival point. That kind of feeling flat. When you've wanted this thing, you've worked so hard for it. And then you get there, and it's like, ugh, now what? So you're avoiding that, aren't you? Because maybe what you're doing is being more mindful. You're enjoying that process for what it is, rather than a path to something. I know that you're aiming, you're going a distance, you're setting little targets like that, but that's just the means of doing it. But not have. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to add in there that actually it's a trick tool for my mind, I think. So if I'm going to approach something that's really, really difficult, so 2019, I climbed Aconcagua, I trekked across the Utah desert, I ran across Iceland and cycled across Australia. But each time I was doing the one I was in, I was using that as a training tool for the one that was coming next. So when I was in the moment of doing something, I never had the pressure on me to actually think that this was so important because it was everything in my life was about that thing. That was just about learning new skills that I would take on to the next adventure, which I would then use those skills. And then as soon as I got into the next adventure, I'd already have the next one planned. And I don't know if it's just a delaying tactic for me, but it allowed me to never put too much pressure on myself when I'm doing something.
I guess there's many things we can kind of take out of that. One of the things I was just thinking there is that the whole saying "every day's a school day," and you've kind of embraced that. Well, I'm going to do this, and I can use that later. So I think that's as another clear message out there. But no, I think the other thing I was going to make a comment there about was so 2019 was a quiet year then, yeah.
Yeah, I like to keep myself busy, and actually, this is probably a good point. I don't want to turn this into a therapy session or anything, but it's a weird thing when you do adventurous stuff, and it's something that I've been grappling with when you're on adventures. You obviously have a lot of time to think, and there's a lot of when you're doing this stuff, people are like, "Oh wow, what you're doing is so inspirational. What you're doing is amazing. You must be very together. You must be very happy to have that motivation." And actually, when I look at how is it that I do it? And it's actually, I see myself as like a coal power station, like a dirty power station, where I actually, as all human beings, we have negative things inside us. And what I try to do is the kind of the self doubt, if there's any self loathing or anything like that, I try and take those things and put them into this engine inside me and turn that into a forward motion power that turns it into something positive that I can be proud of. Not for, I don't do records, I don't do firsts. I want to be proud of it myself because that allows me to turn my negativity into positivity and then feel good about myself and then use that positive feeling to feel empowered that I can do the next thing. And then it just carries on. And then the other weird, I don't want to just keep going on and on, but the other thing is I think a lot of people, when it comes to kind of people say midlife crisis, I would like to say midlife awakenings, and you go off and you do something else because you feel you're unhappy. There is, I think, a fear sometimes, sometimes people think if I quit and go and do this other thing, I'm not going to feel the things I felt when I was doing that thing. And I personally think that if you've got something negative inside you, that probably is ingrained into you a little bit. So no matter what you do in life, still be there. You're just learning how to acknowledge it and then use it to your advantage. Doing an adventure or changing path is not going to answer all your questions.
No, you're absolutely right there. And I think it will be a mistake for people to think that deep underlying issues are going to suddenly be solved by this change in direction. However, what I really like, from what you're saying is this discussion around positive, thinking, negative thinking. I hear this a lot. And in the field of positive psychology, there's a lot of focus on this kind of thought process. And I often want to challenge it a little bit because I think it's about expectations. If we're expecting to feel positive, what does that mean? We've got to be careful about what that means. To feel happy all the time, to feel great all the time, to find everything amazing all the time, then that's not real. So it's not about feeling negative or positive. It's about being realistic. And I think it's more about that old, seize the moment, isn't it? So put in place these plans and these projects and enjoy as well as you can every step of it, but acknowledging that, some of that is going to be really tough. I'm presuming you can't run that far in that many days and not have sore feet or, something's going wrong.
Yeah, and that kind of brings round in a kind of bit of a full circle back to the quote at the beginning, because people would say to me, how do you keep going? And and people kind of smirk when I say this, but it literally happened. I'd be running, I'd feel like I was tired or was overwhelmed or I was in pain or anything like that, and I would just take myself, leave my stroller, sit down, think back to the kind of the stuff I did in the city and how that made me feel, and what I was the moment I was in, why was that so difficult, and why was I loving the road so much, and then just bring myself back into the moment, and then just carry on running. And it was helped, but when you're doing adventure, something positive happens every single day, no matter what. You can have the worst day in the world, but something positive will happen. And if it hasn't happened to you by that point in the day when you're struggling, then you have to try and tell yourself that it's still to come. So to get that positive moment, you have to keep pushing, because then you'll get that positive moment. So you have to trick yourself quite a lot.
Well, some people out there would say that what you've done is quite extreme. To you don't think it is. It's following that passion. But equally, I'd turn around and say that you don't have to go and do something as big as that.
Yeah, you are the keeper of your own destination. You're the person that steers you there. And when you look at someone who's you think has achieved so much more than you, then you just have to think what were they willing to do, and what they were willing to sacrifice, and how hard were they willing to work to get there, and do you want it that badly? And that's the only difference between you and them.
Yeah. Maybe I'd just like to finish perhaps by coming back to our kind of motivation with all these podcasts, which Jason is raising awareness of kind of mental health and mental health in the workplace in particular. And I know, Jamie, that one of the things you do is raise money for charity. And one of your charities that you're passionate about is Calm. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So when I set out to do Running the Americas, I wanted to have a charitable angle to it. It wasn't the driving force, but I was doing this thing that I knew could be a platform. And I immediately chose Macmillan Cancer Care and WaterAid, providing clean water in third world countries. And in the kind of month before I was about to depart, a friend of mine had a fundraiser for a charity called Calm, and I'd never heard of it. Went along and learned that it was the campaign against living miserably. Then there was a speech there, and they were talking about the number of men in the UK who take their lives. And I just immediately looked at what was happening with my life and how I'd got into this spiral, but had the ability to notice it and to make a change, and had the support of people around me to allow that to happen. And then seeing that 11 men in the UK per day were taking their lives made me realize just how many people don't feel that they have a kind of get out. So I wanted to use the charity, the run, as a way of kind of raising money for this charity. And the amount of awareness for mental health over the last kind of 6 years since I ran has been astonishing. And people are, the stigma around suicide is changing, and everything is like, people are engaging in the topic. But the sad thing is, you look at the stats, and I don't know for sure, but the last number I saw, something like 18 men a day are taking their lives. So since in that short space, there's another 7 people per day taking their lives. So the problem is not getting better through awareness. It's actually, we're just becoming more aware that there is a growing problem, and that's something that we have to keep working towards.
Yeah, and we need people like you to, helping to kind of raise money that funds the research and so on, because that's what it's all about. Male suicide rates, are shocking, and it's complex, and it's, there are many factors that increase the risk of suicide, and one of them is being male, and the other is age, so younger men. Other factors like alcohol, I know, and you mentioned alcohol earlier. And also not having good support networks around you, which you've talked about as being very fortunate as having yourself. So I think it's an amazing cause, and that and many others in the field of mental health. So I want to say thanks for your contribution to that charity, and to all the others. I'm sure that the charitable organisations are really, really grateful for that. And we'll put some stuff in the show notes about this too, and links to, Jamie, to your website, and I believe that you have YouTube videos too.
Yeah, if anyone wants to, I'm trying to promote that more people than just my mother watches the videos I put together on my different adventures. So there's lots of videos of every time I do an adventure, I try to create a video afterwards to kind of show people how achievable it is, and kit videos and all that kind of stuff. So YouTube and Instagram, Jamie is running, is where you can find me.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've watched a couple of those, and they're all very useful. And so I definitely recommend that people go and have a look.
You're the other guy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just me. Yeah, I've been stalking you for months now. So
No, seriously, I think that's great, and I do know because I have seen your website that there is information on sort of how to kit yourself, practical stuff for anyone out there who's thinking of going on an adventure. It's really really a good read. Okay, so unless you have any more questions, Jason, I know that you've got hundreds and thousands, but is there anything?
Well, no, I think what I'm going to have to say is, we're drawing close here, but Jamie, we're going to have to ask you to come back in again at another point to continue some more conversations, because I think that there's still many things we could talk about, and I want to know about a few more of your adventures. So definitely going to have to get you back at some point in the future.
Fantastic, anytime.
Yeah, and I'll second that too, because I'm still trying to process, some of the things that you've talked about. I'm need to put my psychologist hat on and sit there and process some of this motivational stuff. It's absolutely brilliant. It was fascinating, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much for listening.
Wow, that was amazing, wasn't it? I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, no, definitely. So inspiring in so many ways. Yeah, it was really, really good. Really, really enjoyed that interview.
I mean, it was fantastic. I'm just marginally worried that our listeners might be left feeling in awe, but also a little bit uneasy after hearing Jamie's story, because, we're not all in a position, are we, are able to achieve such things. And, if we've got dependent children or other family members, it could be tricky.
I think that's a fair point. I said, I hinted on a few of my experiences and some of my feelings, and I think we're going to talk about them a bit later. But you do have to kind of recognise that certain people out there, you've got commitment. So if I'm honest, I've got a wife and 4 children. I've mainly been the main breadwinner because my wife was kind enough to stay at home and look after the kids, and so you can't just walk away from that. You have to, and life still goes on. So you've still got to stay focused on what's right for your family and your children.
Yeah. Okay, but we've got a sort of solution really there, haven't we? Because fortunately, our next podcast we'd already planned as being Life Crises Part 2, because we realised that this was a big subject. And so now, after hearing Jamie speak, after chatting with him, I certainly will be reflecting on what he said. And I'm going to come back in the next podcast with a psychological perspective, analysing what actually made this work for him, and how can those elements be used by others. And also, Jason, I want to talk to you about your experience a little bit more, about the things that you just alluded to, because from what you said earlier, it appears that you had a life crisis moment, but on reflection now, you're thinking perhaps you didn't deal with that at the time. You didn't recognize that. And so then it did become something more serious, which is what you recognized, which was the depression. Let us try and identify what you learned from that, because, you certainly turned things around. And also in the next podcast for our listeners, we're going to be examining the research and what we can all do to stay or put ourselves on the right path and avoid things getting out of control. So I think that's the time for us to wind this one up. And let's finish with our regular slot. It's your turn this time, Jason, for
3 top tips.
Yeah, I think after listening to Jamie, I've got to put out one of his top tips, as we said in the interview, right? Make passion your motivator. I mean, that's just an amazing statement, if anything else, but, use the passion to drive you forward. And I think another one that Jamie said is do what you love. And I think that's also, a very important time for us all to take back and reflect and see what it is we love. So you've got passion and love in there. And the last thing I want to say, again, is take time to reflect and find your sense of purpose. So yeah, kind of reflective, a bit emotional, with a passion, a bit of love in there. So there'll be my 3 top tips for this week.
That's great. Thanks very much. And thank you to all the listeners.
Thanks from me too. I'd also like to add before we go, if you're listening via the Apple Podcast app, please don't forget to rate us, and also feel free to leave us a review. For now, goodbye, but remember,
Get talking.